Hello, welcome. Simon here, and I am back to do another Walking with the Archetypes podcast live. For me, this is fun. It was really fun last Friday when I did it with y'all, and the edge of being here with you live just adds a little bit to it. And for those of you who don't know yet, this is a live podcast recording where I edit a little bit afterwards. So I'll be adding an intro and an outro. That means that the way that I speak with you as I do this live is going to be a little bit fragmented, as there will be parts that I will afterwards, I will edit them afterwards. But today, it is going to be a podcast on real-world alchemy. Just an introduction to what this is, what it represents in your life and my life, and just the kind of expansion of the nervous system that this kind of work can lead to, and the dramatic impact it will have on your capacity to be in the chaos of life, to self-regulate, to be with yourself, to be with others, and so on and so forth. So welcome to those of you who are currently watching. You are very welcome to share in the comments any questions or any experiences that you might have on this particular topic, though for the most part, I will just be recording the podcast. So I think that is it, and that we're good to go. Let's see, I'm going to just ensure that my Telegram notifications aren't making a mess here. So welcome to this new episode. We're going to be speaking today about an introduction to a real-world alchemy. And as I said just now in the intro, this is an inquiry that is inspired by a share of a man inside of our membership last Tuesday. Sometimes breakthroughs are not epic. They are more subtle, but the impact of subtle changes from this kind of alchemy work, the subtle change of knowing how to be with myself in a deeper way, the subtle change of expanding day by day my capacity to be with emotional turmoil or the chaos of the world or whatever it might be. Over time, these subtle changes, they create dramatic and life-altering changes. And I will be sharing his sweet story in the second part of this. But in this first part, I want to speak more about what it is, this real-world alchemy that I'm talking about, and maybe diagnose a little bit why this is important in our life. So I find myself in quite a few conversations online and offline these days. And I can't deny, and probably you can't either, that there is a new kind of charge that has entered into these conversations. And as we disagree politically or about vaccines or what's happening in the world, whatever it might be, I see there is a much greater tendency for people to fall into trench warfare in relationships. This comes from a lacking capacity of regulating my nervous system. And this is where the practice of alchemy comes in. So, of course, initially, alchemy, the way that you've come to know it through movies and through various mythical narratives, was about changing lead to gold. But the deeper esoteric meaning, as you may also know, is that of moving the alchemist closer to God, basically, to use the process of alchemy as a refinement of the ego and moving towards the spiritual. And so inside of alchemy as a concept is the movement towards unity with God, with source, right? And this word alchemy for me has come to feel like home over the many years of leading Reclaiming the Throne. And it's just the kind of work that I really enjoy, because it has the most comprehensive impact in terms of well-being that I know. So here we have these people, right? And sometimes I'm one of them, sometimes you're one of them, and you're in some kind of conversation, you're in some kind of experience in your life. And somebody says something, somebody does something, and it pushes up against something inside of you. It creates some kind of clamping down internally, some kind of friction. That friction often, that friction often brings a level of heat. And so that heat makes us feel angry, irritable, maybe rageful. And so there is a reactivity that enters as this happens. And so when we are in these encounters online, you will a lot of the time feel heat. A lot of the time you will feel inner heat. And alchemy, as it's known, happens in a state typically of heat and pressure, right? And this state that you're in this encounter, you're worked up about something. Maybe, let's say it's something vaccine related, because that seems to be the big thing that we're worked up about these days. You disagree, right? And there is a sense of righteousness that almost immediately is triggered inside of us. Heat expands in our nervous system, and it actually is a level of heat, typically, that we're not able to contain. Because we haven't learned through the practice of alchemy the refinement of the nervous system, right? And so over our life, due to childhood conditioning, traumas, various bumps and crashes along the way, our nervous system goes into this kind of a natural state. There are kinks in the garden hose, so to speak, so that the energy doesn't flow. And depending on the kind of life you've lived, you have different areas of life where those kinks are more or less frequent. So maybe around issues of power, you have a lot of dysregulation in your nervous system, or maybe your dysregulation is around sexuality. It could be around money, whatever, right? And as we then, over the years, we build like an identity around this. I actually come to conceptualize myself based on all of these blockages that I have in my energetic body. Where I do not dare go, or where I'm not able to go in my inner world, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, because there's some kind of kink in my nervous system. These are all places where life overwhelms me. And this is what's happening so often in these conversations online these days. Life overwhelms me. There is more heat and pressure that I'm able to actually hold within the vessel of my nervous system, right? And so this is the challenge that we're faced with right now. It is to do some kind of alchemical practice so that the state of our nervous system goes from fight, flight, freeze, that sympathetic activation, and starts to downregulate towards more tranquility, towards more harmony in the parasympathetic. We need that desperately in the kind of crazy world that we're living in right now. And this is the work that I'm most taken by. Most taken by. And so as you now, to summarize, have this understanding that the nervous system has places where it's blocked and it has places where it's open. And when life starts to push up against those places where you're blocked, it actually starts to create friction in your nervous system. And that's where you start to feel activation. And your ego, your defensive ego structure, is configured around all of these blocks. And so you have come to identify yourself, just as I have, as this kind of wonky being that has all of these places that I cannot go. And that's where alchemy comes in. That's where we need and want to go in order to start opening up. And that's what this man inside of the membership did on Tuesday. And after the break, I will be exploring with you more the kinds of practices that you can take on, the kinds of encounters, mindsets that you can take on in order to start opening up and expanding. See you soon. Okay, so that's part one of the podcast. If you should have any questions, do drop them in. I think I managed to cover that fairly well. And before I start the second part, you can just maybe sit with this a little bit, having watched it, and feel into your nervous system. And where is it that you feel open, and where is it that you feel sort of contracted? Maybe someplace in your upper body, maybe someplace in your sex. It could be in your brain, somewhere else. There might be some kind of sense of unease, dis-ease. And the kind of friction that you also come to experience there, it is a heat, and you need heat in order to alchemize it. But it's a kind of heat that you're not able in that moment of activation to actually use to purify your nervous system. This happens to me less now than it used to, but when we come up against those places where I'm overwhelmed in terms of my holding capacity, that heat actually explodes into the nervous system in a destructive way, right? But that heat is important. So make no mistake, and we're going to be addressing that now, I believe, in part two. Okay, welcome back. So in this part two, we're going to be speaking more about how you can actually do this kind of expansion and opening up of your nervous system. But first, I want to share this sweet little story of one of the men inside of our Forge membership. He's been with us now, I think, for a year and a half, and he came in very shut down, quite timid, not really in himself. And he's been sharing how the experience of being a father has been very intense because, his children have a lot of emotions, and it's not been easy to be with that. But now on Tuesday, he just shared, it's actually a big deal, but it's kind of subtle and humble when he's sharing it. It was with his daughter. And her cousins couldn't come with her to swimming practice that day, so she was going to be on her own. And she was very sad and upset about this because she wanted to be with her cousins, her friends, right? And started crying. And this man, he would normally have tried to make her stop crying because her tears caused him distress in his nervous system. He didn't have the holding capacity. But in that moment, he had done so much work that the simplicity of what happened, was simply that he could hold his daughter's emotion. And in that moment, for the first time, he just says, It's okay, honey. It's okay to cry. And just holding her for about a minute and letting her cry until she's done crying and she's excited to go swimming again, right? And this is how the capacity of a parent to be in a harmonious state in their nervous system is the greatest gift that we can give to our children, which is a challenging message for those of us who are parents. I'm not yet a parent. I probably will be someday. Is that we are challenged in a deep way, many of us, in these pandemic times. And at the same time, we cannot fall deeply into fear, because that fear translates into the nervous system of our children, right? It just does, because they're open. They're like open receptacles for this energy. So let's talk now about heat. There is a heat in the nervous system that can be summoned through a process of alchemy that actually can purify the channels internally. There is also a heat that can come reactively. It can be an uncontrolled archetypal activation that sends sort of dragon fire through your nervous system, and you start to burn to the ground, essentially. And so after you've had some kind of explosion, you become very, very, very small, and you regret desperately what you've said and done, and you feel self-hatred perhaps, and you start with all kinds of judgment. But this kind of regulated fire with some level of pressure, you can find that in a ritual context. You can find that in a ritual context. And so one of the things that we like to do inside of Reclaiming the Throne is we like to do breath work. This is one of my favorite ways of starting to charge the inner holding capacity. We're just filling with oxygen. Like, you can do holotropic breath work. You can even do Wim Hof breath. All of these breath work types, they will expand your holding capacity in such a way that you have more ability to be with that triggering emotion, those kinds of conflict situations that are very, very common for us now, especially on social media. And to also notice the way that your conditioned self moves as you are in these kinds of triggered situations. When I say the conditioned self, it's like that part of you that wants to throw out hooks and who is easily hooked because it wants to perpetuate itself. And so imagine that you are in some kind of very provocational social media conversation, and somebody has put forth some kind of argument about politics or whatever that you find utterly, utterly crazy. And if you don't have the capacity of self-regulation because you've done alchemy, now you're going to throw it back at them. You're going to throw fireballs at them. You piece of shit. You're so stupid, whatever, it's like very, very lot of arrogance or a lot of condemning words and these kinds of things. This is the way that your pain body, if you will, or your conditioned self continues. Rather, allow the fire, allow whatever activation which is inside of you to actually circulate in the body. Perry Chase talks about eating the energy, and I like that a lot. It's this feeling that something is coming towards me, but instead of having to defend, no, and then throw it back with twice as much force, Instead, I just inhale it. I sit with it. I sit in the activation. And I allow that activation to start moving through me, through a presencing in the moment. I can do breath work, but I bring my attention to the very center of my being. I begin to regulate. I begin to spread this energy in a more harmonious way through my body. And in this way, reactivity is actually transmuted to pure power. And that's the alchemy. And when you have pure power, you don't need to use these hooks anymore. You don't need to throw out hooks, and you aren't easily hooked. Which means that the kind of patterned relational ways that we tend to be with each other when we're taken by these hooks, when we're taken by these reactive patterns, they start to dissipate, and we start to become actually ourselves. You know, one of the things that you will see with somebody who hasn't done this alchemy, who hasn't done this expansion of their energy system, hasn't done this energy work, is that the way that they communicate, the way that they be in their life, is a carbon copy of so many thousands, if not millions, of other people. It's almost like they don't have their own opinions. And so you can actually, if you have some capacity of seeing and of presencing, you can actually predict with 99% accuracy exactly what they're going to say and do next. Because it's pattern behavior, because it's determined through the blockages in their energy system. And those blockages, again, create identity structures, and then that creates group identity, hive mind, and it's very, very, very predictable behavior. But once you actually start to eat this energy, you don't immediately throw it back. You actually take a moment and you circulate it. You know, this applies to crypto trading. It applies to anything that is determined through some level of emotional self-regulation. You know, you come from the activation through to power. And the fire now doesn't burn my nervous system. It actually begins to purify my nervous system, because it's a fire with focus. It's not a fire that destroys. It's a fire with focus. Which is to say that wherever you're feeling triggered in your life is exactly the place in which you have enormous opportunity to expand your energy system. And typically the places where we are the most hooked in life is around power, sex, and money. And this is why the tantric practices are so often associated with these three. Right? And so tantric masters typically end up in some kind of scandal with a lot of sex with students. They have a lot of cars in their garage. They have a lot of money, like Osho style. This happens a lot of the time because maybe they initially had the capacity to circulate the energy through their nervous system. And maybe one day it became too much, or maybe we just don't understand the kind of spiritual mastery that they had. And so we're misinterpreting their actions. But this is the tantric path, ultimately. Tantra is some level of alchemy where this fire, this kundalini in some cases, when we speak about the tantric practices, this fire is the purifying force on the inside. So what I want to give you today is the invitation to take all of these triggering situations that you're in your life these days and use them as a practice arena. Don't use them as a place to further hunker down in your conditioned identity that is entirely constructed around the blockages in your nervous system. Rather, remove the blockages in your nervous system. Eat the energy. This is how we expand. This is how we come to have the capacity to be with ourselves in an easeful way, even during conflict. And so the people that are trying to hook us into their dominator, perpetrator, victim, whatever system of belief and behavior, they won't be successful. And this is the only way that we will change the suffering of humanity right now, is if enough grown-up adults develop the capacity to receive other people's anger, frustration, without throwing it back in a weaponized way. We actually just be with it. We eat the energy, we become more powerful as a result, and thus we have ample space in our own interiority, in our own nervous system, to be with each other in our triggered, chaotic places. So that's the practice. That's the practice. And if you're interested to explore this kind of practice more with us in Reclaiming the Throne, then don't hesitate to reach out to us on innerthrone.com, book a wake-up call, and we can talk more about these things. I think this is all I have for you today, and I believe it's time now to return to nature. This is the part of the podcast where I add the last bit where I'm out in nature and I'm sort of wrapping up the podcast. Hope this was helpful. There was a lot of strands in here, though I like this inquiry. There's a lot of power that's available for you here when you take it on fully. And I also hope that you see the importance of doing this work at this moment in our cultural evolution, because people are losing their capacity to self-regulate, but you can actually take responsibility for a different way. And I think together, all of us who go that route, we will have the capacity to regulate a lot of people's related emotions. So that's what I have for you. I hope you're well, and I will probably see you again in this way next week. I will be posting this podcast quite a bit later today, and you will find it on Spotify as well as Apple in a pretty, I think, edited format to just make it a little more optimized. Thank you for being here. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.